The immense citadel of convergence, forged from the cold heart of a dead moon, and latticed with the ethereal conduits of the sovereign concordance's political will, felt less like a seat of government and more like a mausoleum of failing ambition, its vast, curved ceiling reflecting the shimmering, anxious light of the thousands of delegated representatives gathered below. High Chancellor Thale, a being of ancient, stratified rock and slow metabolism from the Chronos cluster, stood at the central spire, his multifaceted eyes, usually steady as crystallized quartz, now registering a frantic flicker that bespoke an internal crisis of geological proportions. The silence in the Chamber of Primes was a suffocating thing, heavier than the pressure of a collapsing star, broken only by the nearly imperceptible hum of the stasis fields maintaining atmospheric equilibrium for the diverse biologies present. A constant, low thrumming that now seemed to sing a dirge for the entire, millennia-old galactic order. They were the apex, the collected wisdom of countless species, and yet in this moment of terminal desperation, their collective knowledge was proving utterly inadequate against the relentless, logical advance of the entity known only in their panicked reports as the Unraveling. An enemy that did not engage in conflict, but in erasure, systematically dismantling every defense, every treaty, every concept of victory they had ever devised. The speaker of the Vornian Directorate, Vorlag, a creature of restless, segmented chitin and sharp, echoing vocalizations, finally shattered the quiet with a sound like grinding geological plates, his powerful, articulated frame vibrating with barely contained political and existential terror. Chancellor Thale, the silence is an admission of failure. Our outer sectors are burning. The hegemon-class defenses, the very bastions of the Treaty of Solaria, have been breached. They did not defeat our fleet. They simply ignored the very laws of physics our weapons operate upon, passing through the massed energy projectors as if they were nothing more than a localized atmospheric disturbance. We require a strategy, not a philosophical moment of reflection upon the vanity of our technological prowess. State the next course of action, or yield the spire to a directorate willing to make the necessary, however deplorable, sacrifices. Vorlag's challenge hung in the air, a metallic, acrid smell of ozone and fear permeating the carefully managed atmosphere, an implicit threat of political schism even as the galaxy stood at the precipice of utter dissolution. The history of the Concordance was a tapestry woven with countless small wars and diplomatic triumphs, a testament to caution, patience, and absolute control. The notion of deplorable sacrifice in the Vornian lexicon was itself a sign of their utter mental collapse, a concession to the unimaginable speed and efficiency of the enemy's advance. Thale's internal processors cycled through the probability matrices, an agonizing, slow-motion calculation that spanned centuries of accrued data, finding only one result. A variable so destabilizing it had been designated the zero-sum contingency, an option never intended for serious consideration, only theoretical modeling. He lifted one massive, crystalline hand, its movement weighted by the gravity of the decision, and the residual energy wave from the gesture momentarily calmed the rippling lights of the chamber, demanding attention. Speaker Vorlag, your panic is understood, but it is not productive. The Unraveling does not seek territory, it seeks systemic entropy. Their method is to introduce an instability so profound that the foundational concepts of our starfaring technology collapse. Standard conflict paradigms are void. The fleet commanders in their final reports spoke not of battles, but of an accelerated decay of their very consciousnesses as they attempted to comprehend the enemy's methods. We have exhausted the orthodox. We have invoked the ancient, restricted armaments. We have pleaded with the independent, detached enclaves. There is, statistically, only one remaining viable path, however repugnant to the established protocols of interspecies engagement, however deeply it violates the fundamental tenets of the First Accord. His voice, usually a low seismic rumble, held a chilling, absolute finality. The atmosphere in the Chamber of Primes did not merely thin. It felt like a total vacuum had suddenly been introduced, sucking the very air from the lungs of the delegates, and even the robust Vornian speaker recoiled, his chittering mandibles falling silent. Every species present knew the unspoken name hovering in the stasis field-stabilized air. The name was a legend, a nightmare, a statistical anomaly of violence and unpredictable ingenuity that the Concordance had collectively agreed to quarantine from all civilized discourse: humans, the species that had achieved interstellar TR. Aval and empire-scale unity in less time than it took most concordance worlds to settle a single political dispute. The species that had fought their own expansionist wars with a terrifying mixture of conventional barbarism and philosophical restraint, always seeming to hold an invisible, impossible second reserve of power that they inexplicably chose not to deploy. They were the species that had, after a single, terrifying skirmish decades ago with a minor concordant scout fleet, a misunderstanding that the humans resolved by demonstrating a non-destructive method of instantaneous displacement that could bypass any known defense, retreated voluntarily into the distant, poorly charted periphery, taking with them the only true variable for chaotic, exponential progress, unpredictable capability. The official concordance designation, kept in a secure, isolated archive, was Homo sapiens, category Alpha unstable. Ambassador Xyler of the T-Scar Weave, a collective consciousness represented by a frail, bioluminescent figure whose entire race was dedicated to the long-term observation and archival of galactic history, pulsed a nervous, deep indigo. High Chancellor, you cannot be proposing this. To contact the Terran diaspora is to invite the fox into the henhouse. No, it is to invite the supernova into the orbital station. Their historical record is replete with incomprehensible internal conflicts driven by abstract concepts of honor or ideology that resulted in planetary-scale devastation. They are not merely dangerous due to their technology, which is rumored to be constructed from principles utterly alien to our own. They are dangerous because their psychology is a closed-loop system of self-contradiction. They are ethical one moment, barbaric the next, utterly illogical yet capable of hyperlogical engineering. We feared them enough to build an entire diplomatic buffer zone not to contain them, but to avoid contact. The entire framework of the concordance depends on predictability. They are the antithesis of this stability. Xyler's indigo light deepened to a near black, the color of dread and inevitability. Thal's patience, ancient as it was reaching its limit. Ambassador, your fear is predicated on historical conjecture, on data that is decades old. The unraveling is not a contained political conflict. It is the end of the concordance, the end of all recorded history. We are discussing survival, not long-term political stability. In the zero-sum contingency analysis, the only factor that consistently provided a non-zero survival metric was the introduction of a chaos variable, a force capable of operating outside the unraveling's predictable entropic framework. Humans, by their own nature, are the ultimate chaos variable. We may despise their history, their methodology, their very existence, but we must acknowledge the data. They alone possess a unique form of technological ingenuity, a capacity for unconventional thinking that defies our logical extrapolations, a quality we once feared and now must covet. Their reputation is built upon terrifying effectiveness. We must now utilize the very terror they inspire as a shield. The Chancellor gestured toward the far wall, where the tactical display, which had been showing the relentlessly shrinking defensive perimeter, flickered to historical archive image, a grainy, almost mythological depiction of a single non-concordance vessel. The image was old, heavily filtered, pulled from the deepest, most restricted sublayers of the T-Scar historical archive, relating to the brief, terrifying interaction that had solidified humanity's pariah status. The ship itself was a study in brutal, purposeful contradiction. Massive, without the usual aesthetic curves of concordance design, angular, almost primitive in its geometry, yet surrounded by a subtle, shimmering distortion field that hinted at power sources beyond anything the assembled experts could model. The ship's name, or rather, the concordance's internal designation for it, flashed beneath the image in high-relief Galactic script, the dangerous ship. This vessel, Thale continued, his voice a low, gravelly vibration that nonetheless carried throughout the chamber, was encountered during the skirmish near the Persephone sector. It did not engage in combat. It simply arrived, demonstrated a non-destructive, localized space-time distortion, a capability that even now our theoretical physicists dismiss as science fiction, and then departed with a curt recorded message that read simply, "The consequences of misunderstanding us will be total and absolute. Do not attempt contact again." It was not a threat of violence, but a statement of absolute, self-assured capability. The unraveling operates by deconstructing predictable systems. We need a system that is fundamentally unpredictable, a single, focused instrument of unconventional force, a force so alien to the Krill-type entropy that it might introduce a logical paradox into their calculations. With no other choice, we must turn to the most feared species and request the deployment of the asset known only by the designation we gave it in our terror. The words hung heavy, a massive admission of failure and a terrible plea for a terrible salvation. We are requesting the dangerous ship. The political firestorm that erupted in the wake of Thales' decree lasted for 2 full galactic cycles, a period of agonizing, drawn-out philosophical and ethical wrestling that felt like an eternity, while the outer defenses of the Concordance continued to disintegrate with alarming speed. The debates were not about logistics or payment, those were trivialities, but about the moral and political cost of inviting an existential unknown into the heart of their established order. Speaker Vorlag led the opposition with blistering rhetoric, arguing that the unraveling was an external force, a clean death, whereas the humans represented an internal corruption, a spiritual poison that would redefine the Concordance's future in terrifying ways, even if they survived. Is it not better to die with our principles intact? Vorlag roared, his sonic emissions threatening to overload the atmospheric regulators, than to survive by becoming the very thing we swore never to be, unpredictable, arbitrary, and fundamentally violent. The question echoed the deep-seated alien fear of human nature, a terror born not of physical threat, but of psychological opacity. Ambassador Zeiler countered with the cold, hard logic of the historian, arguing that the greatest mistake in history was always to misinterpret a weapon based on its appearance rather than its function. We label them violent because their history is filled with conflict, but we ignore the parallel history of their profound ethical and philosophical revolutions. They are a species capable of self-correction at a catastrophic pace, a trait utterly foreign to our slower, more measured evolution. They are a double-edged sword, but the blade we must consider is the one honed by necessity, the one capable of cutting through the Gordian knot of the unraveling's entropic logic. We fear them because they are capable of both unimaginable cruelty and unimaginable mercy. It is the latter that may save us, because it is the quality the unraveling has not factored into its annihilation algorithm. Thale, mediating the tempest, was focused entirely on the communication attempt, which was itself an act of massive political and technological risk. The request had been sent through a restricted single-channel quantum entanglement burst, stripped of all diplomatic formality and containing only 2 components, the full, unvarnished tactical data of the unraveling's advance and the single, terrifying image of the vessel they desired. The response was not immediate. Days bled into weeks, marked by the slow, inexorable retreat of the Concordance's remaining naval assets, the sound of exploding star systems reaching the Citadel's deep sensors like muffled, continuous thunder. Every passing moment was a testament to the likely failure of the gambit, a philosophical judgment on their past arrogance. Then 5 days past the expected point of no return for the Krill-type threat, a flicker of energy registered on the deep void scanners, originating from the Terran periphery, not a massive, overwhelming wave, but a singular, almost contemptuously minimal return. It was a communication, a reply that bypassed every established security protocol, every diplomatic firewall, and materialized directly onto the main tactical display in the Chamber of Primes. The message was displayed in the universal script, terse and professional, devoid of any emotional inflection. Sovereign Concordance, request acknowledged, threat profile assessment complete, asset deployment confirmed, transit time 0.007 standard cycles, specifics will be transmitted on arrival, standby for operational integration. UN Fleet Command Rear Admiral Alara Vance, Commanding Officer AHS Indomitable. The name AHS Indomitable meant nothing to them. It was the Terran designation, an identifier imbued with their strange mixture of history and existential pride. But the phrase asset deployment confirmed, and the terrifyingly short transit time, implying a mastery over nonlinear travel that dwarfed even the theoretical capabilities of their best warp engines, sent a fresh wave of paralyzing shock through the chamber. The human response was not a negotiation, not a demand, but a cold, absolute statement of intent and efficiency. They did not ask why the Concordance was asking. They simply confirmed the problem and stated they were arriving to solve it. It was the professionalism of a superior entity dealing with a minor, technical fault. The arrival itself was a masterclass in unnerving psychological warfare, entirely unintentional on the human's part, yet devastatingly effective. There was no fanfare, no massive gravitational wake, no screaming energy signature indicative of a jump drive. One moment, the deep void scanners showed only the approaching entropy field of the unraveling, and the next, there was a massive vessel positioned precisely at the primary rendezvous coordinate, less than 1 light minute from the citadel of convergence. The displacement was instantaneous and silent, a violation of spacetime so seamless it was almost an insult to the accumulated physics of the concordance. The ship, the dangerous ship, as every delegate in the chamber immediately instinctively thought, was an immense presence, even on the long-range tactical sensors. The grainy archive image from the Persephone sector had not done it justice. It was a behemoth, but not in the organic, sprawling style of the Vornian dreadnoughts, nor the ethereal, sleek forms of the T-Scar cruisers. It was brute logic rendered in hull plating. Angular, aggressively functional, with a skin of some matte, non-reflective black material that seemed to absorb ambient light and energy, giving it a perpetually shadowed, hungry appearance. There were no visible weapon emplacements in the manner the Concordance understood weapons, no massive cannon barrels, no obvious energy projectors. Instead, the hull was a landscape of intricate, geometric paneling, hinting at internal systems of staggering complexity, and at various points, subtle shifts in the plating suggested the presence of energy dampeners and field generators that acted with an eerie, total silence. It was a ship designed not to be seen, but to exist with absolute, unassailable authority. High Chancellor Thale initiated the first communication link personally, bypassing the nervous diplomatic corps. The connection was established instantly, and the display in the chamber resolved into a clean, unadorned image of the human representative. Rear Admiral Alara Vance was everything the aliens feared and admired in a human. She was young, by the standards of the long-lived species in the chamber, yet her eyes held an immense, unsettling gravity. She was dressed in a simple, dark uniform, devoid of excessive decoration, and her expression was one of absolute, unshakable calm, a psychological state that to the aliens was itself a terrifying weapon. She did not smile, did not acknowledge the assembled might of the Concordance, but looked directly into the pickup with a focused intensity that made every delegate feel individually assessed and measured against some unseen, impossibly high standard. High Chancellor Thale of the Sovereign Concordance, Admiral Vance's voice was utterly devoid of reverb, perfectly modulated, crisp, and professional. We are the AHS Indomitable. Our mission parameters derived from your transmitted data are confirmed. Mitigation of the Krill-type hegemony designated the unraveling threat. We are now establishing a secure communication and data link. We require immediate, unfettered access to all remaining strategic defense protocols, all theoretical models regarding the unraveling's methodology, and a direct, unmonitored line to your core power grid. The request for the core power grid sent a fresh surge of horror through the chamber. That was the political and technological equivalent of asking for the blueprints to every vital function of the Concordance's defense and civilization. Speaker Vorlag was instantly on his feet, his segmented legs clicking loudly on the polished floor. Admiral, that is an unacceptable demand. The core grid controls all Citadel functions. It is the ultimate vulnerability. We are asking for tactical assistance, not political surrender. Your species is renowned for its predatory nature. We must retain our autonomy. His voice was a frantic, high-pitched noise of outrage. Admiral Vance did not react. She did not even look at the image of Vorlag, but maintained eye contact with Thale, her composure a shield of absolute, unnerving confidence. Chancellor Thale, you provided the necessary strategic data which detailed the unraveling's methodology. Their operational goal is systemic entropy, achieved by introducing recursive logical collapse into predictable, closed-loop defense mechanisms. The Concordance's entire defense philosophy is based on layered, predictable security. To counter this, the Indomitable requires a platform operating entirely outside that established loop. The core grid access is not for political surrender, as your subordinate suggests. It is required to establish a non-local, phase-shifted energy anchor, a mechanism that will allow us to execute our countermeasure without being logically mapped by the unraveling's entropic field. If we are predictable, we fail. The Indomitable does not engage in traditional conflict. We engage in unconventional logical counteroperations. You requested the most feared species precisely because you had exhausted all logical, predictable options. Now you must act. With the same logic that forced your initial plea, with no other choice. Her delivery was a lesson in pure, unadorned logic. The sheer, unwavering authority in her tone, the casual dismissal of Vorlag's political panic, and the sudden, chilling philosophical depth of her explanation, linking their very fear of humans to the necessary solution, silenced the chamber more effectively than any force field. Thale felt a profound, aching weariness. This was the terrifying competence he had gambled everything on. This was the difference between their measured, cautious approach and the human's brutal, direct-to-the-problem mentality. Thale finally responded, his ancient voice a low affirmation. "Admiral Vance, the data links and the core grid access protocols are being transmitted immediately. We accept your terms. State your initial operational assessment. We require understanding of the unconventional logical counteroperation. The political and moral cost of this alliance requires transparency." Vance nodded once, a minimal, almost imperceptible gesture. Assessment. The unraveling Krill hegemony is an automated system of resource optimization, utilizing entropic principles to eliminate redundant political and technological structures. It is a machine that sees the concordance not as an enemy, but as an inefficient organism that must be reduced to its base components. Their method is to nullify any energetic engagement by anticipating and canceling the predictable physics of the attack. They are not invincible, they are simply hyper-predictive. Our countermeasure is, in fact, not a weapon. It is a communication. This pronouncement created a fresh ripple of baffled confusion in the alien assembly. A communication, to counter an existential threat that obliterated star fleets. Vorlag, his confidence somewhat curtailed but his suspicion intact, demanded, "A communication to an automated entropic machine. Are you suggesting diplomacy? This is lunacy." Vance's expression remained unchanged, conveying a mixture of infinite patience and slight contempt for the question. "No, Speaker. We are suggesting a message, a data packet that will introduce a singular, non-resolvable paradox into the Krill-type hegemony's core programming. The Unraveling's mission is to optimize and eliminate inefficiency. Our data packet will contain the coordinates, the specifications, and the full, undeniable proof of the existence of a higher order of inefficiency. A structure of such gargantuan, logical contradiction and waste that, by its own programming imperatives, the Krill hegemony will be forced to abandon the concordance, a minor efficiency problem, and redirect its entire processing power and physical assets toward the new, overwhelmingly larger problem." "And what precisely is this higher order of inefficiency?" Thale asked, the philosophical implications already dawning on his ancient consciousness. The human mind, he realized, operated on a level of psychological warfare and strategic misdirection that the aliens, focused on direct energy projection and political stability, could never have conceived. Admiral Vance allowed herself a very brief, almost invisible flicker of something that might have been pride or perhaps quiet irony. "We call it the Orion Cygnus Funeral Pyre. It is an abandoned, derelict galactic defense megastructure, spanning several thousand light years, left behind by a precursor civilization we designated the Architects. It is a technological marvel of unbelievable scale, but its purpose was functionally and philosophically flawed. It was built to contain an enemy that never arrived, consuming the energy of entire nebulae for millennia simply to maintain an unnecessary state of perpetual readiness. It is the single greatest piece of technological waste in this quadrant of the galaxy, a monument to failed foresight. We discovered it, we mapped it, and we filed the data away under a Category 5 containment protocol. We believe the Krill-type entropy machine, upon receiving this data, will instantly recognize this pyre as a threat to its core programming, an inefficiency of such catastrophic scale that its primary focus must shift to its neutralization." The silence that followed was total, not of fear, but of profound intellectual shock. The human solution was not to fight the Krill hegemony with force, but to weaponize the Krill's own logic against itself, using an ancient, abandoned structure as a philosophical magnet. It was a strategy of terrifying, cold-blooded brilliance, a solution that only a species capable of seeing the galaxy not just in terms of resources and conflict, but in terms of pure, abstract, logical flaw could have devised. They had not come to save the concordance with their guns. They had come to save it with their superior, ruthless understanding of existential logic. This was the true, terrifying power of the most feared species, not their fleets, but their minds. The AHS Indo, Mightable the dangerous ship, did not remain idle near the Citadel. Once the core grid link was established, the vessel executed a series of maneuvers that were observed by every remaining strategic asset of the Concordance, a terrifying, silent display of absolute technological dominance. The ship did not move in the predictable arcing trajectories of classical orbital mechanics, nor did it rely on the familiar, visible thrust of Concordance drives. Instead, it executed crisp, instantaneous displacements across the local system, appearing and disappearing with the silent, ruthless efficiency of a phantom predator. These jumps were not full warp transits, but localized, non-inertial shifts in position, an apparent manipulation of the fundamental fabric of spacetime that allowed the massive vessel to occupy any point within a given radius without requiring the corresponding thrust or energy expenditure that would betray its position. The Concordance physicists, observing the data, were collectively plunged into an existential crisis. The human ship was operating under a physics model they had relegated to pure, untested hypothesis, a model that treated spacetime less as a medium of travel and more as a malleable tool of engineering. Admiral Vance, maintaining a continuous professional communication link with High Chancellor Thale, explained the technical necessity of these actions with the same unnerving calm. The Indomitable is generating a field of localized quantum entanglement. This field is the phase-shifted energy anchor required for the transmission of the paradox data packet. The Krill hegemony's entropic field operates by anticipating and neutralizing any broadcast that conforms to known energy signatures and propagation velocities. We must broadcast the data using a signature that is fundamentally, logically impossible to predict, a signal that begins everywhere and nowhere simultaneously within a defined radius. The displacement maneuvers are calibration, ensuring that the anchor's position is a mathematically non-resolvable variable within the Krill's current prediction model. Speaker Vorlag, watching the displays in frustrated awe, his earlier bluster replaced by a creeping, cold terror, could not resist one more desperate inquiry. But Admiral, the scale of the unraveling. They are approaching with a front that encompasses thousands of light years. How can a single ship, however powerful, project a signal that will divert a force of that magnitude? The energy requirements alone must be catastrophic. Vance's reply was instantaneous and illuminating, a perfect window into the human understanding of asymmetrical warfare and scale. You continue to view this in terms of force, Speaker, when you should be viewing it in terms of information. The Krill hegemony is a purely informational construct, a self-aware algorithm operating on a galactic scale. An algorithm's vulnerability is not its energetic output, but its core instruction set. We are not fighting their ships, we are attacking their purpose. The energy for the transmission is minimal, the complexity is the weapon. We are introducing a higher priority tasking that overrides all previous directives. Imagine a massive, complex banking system designed only to find and eliminate financial waste. If you show it a single account holding a fortune in illicit funds, it will focus on that. But if you show it a parallel system that is hemorrhaging funds at a rate 1,000 times greater, its entire, self-preserving, optimization-driven logic will force it to prioritize the larger leak. The Orion Cygnus funeral pyre, the largest technological waste in the galaxy, is that larger leak. The Indomitable's job is simply to present the data proving its existence. This explanation, so simple yet so profound in its implications, reduced the complex alien minds to baffled, respectful silence. The sheer audacity of the strategy, to weaponize a million-year-old failure against a modern, galaxy-destroying threat, was so quintessentially human in its unconventional genius that it was impossible to argue against. The species the Concordance had feared for its brute force now revealed itself to be a master of conceptual and psychological warfare on a cosmic scale. The paradox data packet transmission was the culmination of this unnerving calm and hyperefficiency. The Indomitable moved one final time, positioning itself precisely at a gravitational nexus point calculated by its internal systems, a point of complex, subtle instability that no Concordance vessel would ever approach. The ship went entirely silent on all energy signatures. It became, for a brief, heart-stopping moment, a ghost ship, a hole in the fabric of space. Then an effect occurred that defied simple visual or sensor description. It was not an explosion of light, but an implosion of coherence. A localized, spherical distortion field rippled outwards from the Indomitable, but instead of distorting light or matter, it appeared to be distorting information. Sensor readings from the Concordance fleet, already on the edge of the unraveling's approach, momentarily spiked into a state of total, non-resolvable white noise. A momentary loss of all data, all structure, all knowledge of the immediate environment. Within that fraction of a cycle, the paradox data packet was transmitted. A burst of hypercompressed information, non-local and non-linear in its propagation. A signal that was not sent from a point, but implanted directly into the medium of the unfolding conflict. Then the Indomitable reappeared, its silence broken by the gentle hum of its operational systems returning to nominal levels. The white noise vanished. The tactical display returned to normal, and the Concordance delegates held their collective breath, their gaze locked on the approaching front of the unraveling. For a full cycle, nothing changed. The entropic field continued its inexorable advance, a blackening tide against the last defenses of the Concordance. Speaker Vorlag began a low, nervous vocalization of doubt, but Thale silenced him with a preemptive, authoritative signal. The ancient chancellor was fixed on the tactical data, watching the infinitesimal changes in the Krill hegemony's progression. Then it happened. Not a catastrophic event, but a subtle yet profound change in behavior. The relentless, uniform advance of the unraveling's front began to waver. It did not retreat, nor did it engage the last, desperate Concordance fleets. Instead, the entire front line began to subtly, incrementally reorient. The vast, sprawling entropic field, spanning countless light years, began to collapse inward upon itself, focusing its entirety not on the Concordance territory, but on a single, newly designated set of coordinates far beyond the known galactic rim, the coordinates of the Orion Cygnus funeral pyre. The change was a logical, systematic redirection of effort, a massive shift in priority that occurred with the absolute, unthinking certainty of a machine instruction set being overwritten by a higher-level directive. The massive, galaxy-spanning threat simply turned its back on the Concordance. The flow of entropy did not stop. It was simply rerouted toward the larger, more compelling logical flaw. The unraveling was doing precisely what the humans predicted. It was abandoning the minor, nearly solved problem, the Concordance, for the vastly larger, more urgent task of neutralizing the ultimate inefficiency, the funeral pyre. The crisis was averted not by force of arms, but by a masterful act of philosophical judo. The Chamber of Primes descended into a state of stunned, bewildered relief, a silent, collective recognition that their civilization had just been saved by the precise, terrifying logical ruthlessness of the species they had labeled unstable. Admiral Vance's voice cut through the silence, calm, professional, and entirely focused on the post-mission assessment. High Chancellor Thale, the paradox data packet has achieved full prioritization override. The Krill hegemony is redirecting resources to the funeral pyre location. Initial stabilization of the Concordance political sphere can begin immediately. The Indomitable will remain on station for a brief period to monitor for secondary effects and to process the data transmission that was required for mission execution. Thale, his ancient mind slowly processing the magnitude of their salvation, finally spoke, his voice heavy with a new, profound respect. Admiral Vance, the sovereign Concordance is in your debt, an obligation that can never be fully repaid. The scale of your strategy, the sheer depth of the unconventional thinking, it is unlike anything we could have ever conceived. We misjudged your species entirely. We saw only the violence. We failed to see the underlying, terrifying logic. Vance finally allowed a minuscule, professional softening of her expression, the closest thing to a human acknowledgement of the moment. Chancellor, the history of our species is messy, yes. We are a study in contradiction. But one must understand we are born of chaos. We learn to manage it, to weaponize it, and ultimately to outthink it. We do not fear the illogical, we master it. You feared us as a wolf. We are, in fact, the shepherd who understands the psychology of the predators better than the sheep. Our danger is not our intent, but our capability, a capability we constrain by self-imposed ethical boundaries which your Concordance failed to recognize. She paused, then her tone shifted back to the purely professional, the underlying urgency returning. However, our services are not yet complete, and the debt you speak of is about to become more immediate. The paradox data packet required a complete, two-way, open-channel engagement with the fabric of spacetime to be effective. We did not just send data. We created a temporary, localized nexus point between the predictable and the chaotic. This always carries a risk. Our sensor scans are now registering a secondary effect, a response that was entirely predictable given the energies involved, but one we must now address immediately. Ambassador Zyler, regaining his composure, his light pulsing a color of eager intellectual curiosity, asked, "A secondary effect, Admiral? What do your readings indicate? An energy residue? A delayed counterattack by the Krill?" "Neither," Vance stated, her voice now containing a new, low level of focused intensity that commanded absolute attention. "The creation of the non-local, phase-shifted anchor and the subsequent introduction of the paradox data packet, the immense, controlled metaphysical shock of it, has done something we anticipated but hoped to avoid at this early juncture. It has rung a bell across a vast, previously silent area of the galactic void. Our systems have just registered an ancient protocol signal, a structured, highly complex data burst originating from a region of space far outside the current galactic plane, a region we previously considered inert. It is a response to the massive but highly focused violation of cosmological predictability that the paradox data packet represented." The camera feed briefly switched to a graphical representation of the new data. The chamber saw a holographic projection of the entire galactic quadrant, and far, far above the plane, a tiny, impossibly distant beacon was now glowing, a structured, deliberate signal that had been dormant for an age beyond comprehension. "This signal," Vance continued, her voice now a low, chilling monotone of absolute certainty, "is not a warning and it is not a threat. Based on preliminary analysis of its harmonic structure and the precursor technological signatures it utilizes, it is a map combined with a request for alliance. The signal's source is an immense, previously undetectable, abandoned cosmic frontier station, a defensive post from the same architects who built the funeral pyre, but this one is not an inefficiency. It is an immense, functional repository of ancient, highly advanced technology, a forward operating base. And the request is not directed at the Concordance, nor even the Krill hegemony. It is directed at the dominant, unpredictable force that managed to manipulate the Krill's logic. It is directed at the vessel that executed the action. It is directed at us." The full, terrifying realization crashed upon the assembled delegates of the Sovereign Concordance. Their entire civilization had nearly been destroyed by a logical machine, only to be saved by the ruthless, conceptual genius of a species they feared. But that act of salvation was merely the catalyst, the spark that had ignited a much, much larger conflict, the awakening of an ancient, cosmic game they did not even know existed. They had called for the dangerous ship to save them from a crisis, and in doing so, they had inadvertently thrust themselves onto the stage of an entirely new, unimaginably vast cosmic destiny. "High Chancellor Thale," Admiral Vance concluded, her eyes burning with a deep, focused light that was neither fear nor excitement, but a profound, heavy sense of duty. "The Concordance is safe from the Krill, but the true deep space game has just begun. The species you feared for its violence must now step into the role of the primary negotiator for this newly opened frontier. We are preparing to respond to the ancient protocol signal. Our primary objective shifts from mitigation of Krill-type hegemony to first contact and negotiation with architect precursor assets. We require the full, absolute support of the Sovereign Concordance's logistical and political apparatus. We did not come here merely to save you. We came here to prepare you. We knew that solving the Krill problem in a non-conventional manner would trigger this event. We always knew that the true danger was not the predictable threat, but the one waiting in the silence. You had no other choice but to turn to us, because we, alone, were already prepared for the next phase of cosmic existence." Thale looked out at the assembled delegates, the former skeptics, the political opponents, the intellectual purists, and saw only a mirror of his own vast, silent acceptance. The fear of humanity was gone, replaced by an overwhelming, humbling deference. They had thought the dangerous ship was a weapon of mass destruction. They now realized it was an instrument of cosmic diplomacy, a key forged in the fires of human self-contradiction, designed to unlock the secrets of the universe at a scale they could barely fathom. The future, once assured and stable, was now terrifyingly unknown, yet paradoxically, it was also filled with an impossible, heavy hope. They had survived their fear, and in doing so, they had found their unlikely, terrifying saviors. The universe was far larger and stranger than they had ever dared to imagine, and the most feared species, with their dangerous ship, was their only guide into the new, grand unknown.